Hi, my name is Guerra. Welcome to Nairobi. Two questions. I know it's being a bit of a hog. First question is, you're notoriously vegan. What are you eating in Kenya? Have you enjoyed some ugali? What's your favorite dish in Kenya so far? Second question. So this is a bit more complex in that in Africa we see a lot of people from the West, from the global North, coming down and looking, learning, listening, and oftentimes they go back. There's some learnings. They get a suntan. It's great. What is your plan? Like, what are you doing in Africa? What are you most excited about? And especially after you leave, like, what are you going to be doing once you leave?
First
Thank you.
question, Joseph, do you want to answer better?
Vitalik loves veggies. We preserve a lot of veggies. We had ugali and fish yesterday, and chicha, and other fun stuff.
Yep, good answer. Yeah, I think for long-term plans, I mean, part of our goal is to just try to find ways to support the local community as much as possible, right? So the Ethereum Foundation has some programs which try to support people in, Africa and also other developing regions, particularly Latin America and Southeast Asia. So the Ethereum Fellowship Program is one example, and then the grant program is the ecosystem support program is like actively looking into expanding into these areas. We've started hiring more people with the intentional goal of interacting with local businesses and governments and community organizations in different regions. Right, so I think like a couple of days ago, I saw an article that I think Buenos Aires is the city is interested in starting staking, and some people kind of close to the foundation were fairly involved in that. So those kinds of efforts are efforts that we're definitely interested in expanding over time. Another thing is events, right? So I know our executive director, Aya, for a long time has said that she would love to have a DEF CON in Africa. And but at the same time, one of the reasons why this hasn't happened yet is if you look at if you look back to our DEF CON in Shanghai back in 2016, right? This was a big event in China, partnered with a local organization, tried really hard. But at the same time, it was less effective than it could have been in really bridging the Western and Chinese Ethereum communities. And I think part of that was that basically we kind of walked in and organized an event without really trying hard enough to do kind of grassroots work to get to the point where it's really the local community that's putting in most of the effort, and not just a whole bunch of people teleporting from the outside into a hotel, and it doesn't really matter where the hotel is. So that's the kind of mistake that we don't want to repeat here. So the goal is to start with community building, encourage and support. And support includes subsidizing, includes people coming here, includes advertising and other things. Some smaller scale local events. I mean, some smaller scale events have kind of happened here a little bit, right? So there was a blockchain conference in Kenya back in 2016 that I went to. There was an event in Cape Town back in 2019, but it was only a little bit, and the goal is to get to the point where there's more of those, and get to and eventually to the point where it actually makes sense to have a DEF CON locally a couple of years in the future, right? So that's another goal. And then also supporting local projects, supporting local developers. So one thing that we would love to see, for example, is we would love to see there being an Ethereum client team that's based here, right? So, there's already, for example, many Ethereum client teams, development teams that are American, European, Australian. There's a couple of ZK EVM teams that are Chinese. Polygon is part Indian. We'd love to see a team here, right? And probably multiple teams here. And that's going. The biggest part of that is going to involve, I think, a lot of effort from people here. But there's things that we can do to try to help in terms of, education, for example, trying to intentionally bring some more community members together, and figuring out how to follow up with more of that kind of work is one of the goals for us.
Just two quick things to add to that. Sorry, I interrupted the clock. You can clap.
Yeah. One of the.
Two quick things on that. One is there are so many other chains that come to Kenya and Africa, and you might, some of them have like African or Kenya office head or something like that. It's quite different with Ethereum. Ethereum is extremely decentralized, and the Ethereum Foundation only has 0.5% of the total token supply. So it's a very small part of the broader ecosystem and community. And it's not even driven to say, let's increase Ethereum adoption no matter cost. It's not a marketing engine. It's more of ecosystem support organization. So that's a little bit of a different frame of how to think about Ethereum. And that might be sort of how you see Ethereum community members engaging with Kenya in quite a different way from other players. And the second thing I want to mention is to your question, like, why are we here? What's sort of coming after here? There's a lot of people who want to come and visit. So we have a long list of humans who want to come and visit and connect. And it's not just visiting. The big reason why we're doing this is a lot of the connections and sense making in the Ethereum community happens in the global events that are happening around the world. But it's really hard for Africans to go to those events. And number one is visas. And that's something that, is really annoying. So what we're trying to do is bridge more players to come and connect with builders here to eventually have more events happening here so local and global builders can connect and relate to one another. So the goal is we'll have a lot more of these types of activities where there's more bridging happening with global builders.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mtembe Kiriki, co-founder of a startup called Fastager. And what we're actually working on is how to use NFTs for the customer intelligence and engagement space. My question is particularly around your soulbound tokens, right? How you're, first, the fact that you've been in Africa, you know that there's a huge identity problem. What are some of the ideas around that? And then also just completely randomly, it's like actually how we actually got support for our particular project is a Ukrainian friend who was in Nairobi connected us to a VC in Zug. And I was walking around trying to look for the Ethereum Foundation there, but I wasn't able to. So that small connection of how all these connections of international and coming here is really important. And so thanks for the organizers for this. And so yeah, back to the soulbound tokens and opportunities in Africa.
Yeah, and I think the whole soulbound tokens concept and the identity and reputation ecosystems in general are like a really important topic, right? And one of the reasons why they're a really important topic is that, especially in a global economy where lots of people are far away from each other and don't directly know each other or even each other's countries, like some kind of infrastructure for trust and reputation is needed. And often a lot of the solutions that we just get by default are quite bad, right? So one simple example of this is if you look just like web logins, right? So when you log into a lot of internet services today, you often have to log in using, centralized, usually American services. You have login with Gmail, login with Twitter, login with Facebook, right? And these are centralized systems, and if you use them to log into things, then you get one, this company basically sees a whole bunch of information about you. They see what you're logging into and what you're using this account for. And two, you're basically at the mercy of this company in order to just keep your account, right? So even I personally and a lot of my friends have often had this situation where our accounts at these services just randomly got blocked, suspended, password forgotten, password stolen, one of any number of problems. And we tried reaching out to customer support, but the customer support did not work, right? So this is, I mean, I think this is kind of ironic, right? Because within the crypto space, some of the ways in which people defend centralization is they say like, oh, individuals are not like, sophisticated enough to manage their own keys. And therefore, instead, we need these big companies to manage people's accounts for them. Because if you screw up, they can recover for you. But the reality is like, they don't recover for you, right? They just wait and wait and wait and they never reply. Like I've literally personally had situations where my friends came to me and told me like, hey, I lost my Gmail account because of like some lost forgotten password, stolen something, and I have contacted support. I haven't been able to get it back for months, and basically asked me, to use my personal back channels to try to talk to these companies and get the account back. And sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not. But like, if you are someone who's not directly connected to me, then what are you going to do, right? And this is, a symptom of a system whose goal is, I think, to ensure like some degree of trust and reputation, right? Like the reason why a lot of services demand, Google or Twitter accounts is instead of just letting people sign up by themselves, is because they want to prevent spam, right? And the problem that ends up happening is that they do this and it does prevent spam, but it sometimes is not even that effective at preventing spam because there's sites where you can go and buy 100 Gmail accounts for like 100 or $200, but there's a lot of like legitimate users who are just in context that they were totally not thinking about with it when they came up with the system that just end up being completely screwed by this, right? A lot of these systems are America-centric, and if you're in the wrong country, you can't, like sometimes you don't even get SMS codes. There's just all kinds of issues that I've seen, right? And the question you have to ask is like, well, what's a good alternative? And to me, decentralization actually does provide a good alternative. And when I say decentralization, I don't just mean the kind of more, maximalist, trust no one, everyone has to buy up a brick of titanium and carve their 12 words into that titanium and, protect that thing with their dear life all by themselves kind of decentralization. Like, I mean relying on community trust, right? And, community trust is something that exists everywhere in the world. And in emerging economies, it's often something that people are more used to relying on than they are in let's say places like America, where people are much more used to the paradigm of if you need something, either the government provides it or some big company provides it, and you go sign up and fill in the forms, right? And community trust is like powerful because your friends. Your friends are care about you. Your friends are less likely to betray you. Your friends are not going to just sit on your message for 3 months and never respond if you tell them that, hey, you lost your account and this is important. And generally, I think I personally am much more comfortable relying on a collection of my friends to do things like be the backup for my Ethereum account than some faceless big corporation, right? And that those kinds of applications that you try to leverage local community trust and then try to in some cases use that kind of trust directly, right? So it talks about I've talked about things like multi-sig wallets, social recovery wallets, like basically wallets that are forms of self-custody, so you don't have to trust a centralized actor like FTX or Binance or Mt. Gox with all of your funds. But at the same time, you don't have to put all of the trust into yourself, right? You could say, oh, I have this account and I have the key, but if I lose the key, I'm going to specify, let's say, 7 friends and family members, and you need 4 of them or 5 of them to recover your key if your key gets lost, right? This is called social recovery. You can do it. There's wallets that do it already. Or if you want to protect against theft, you can say, well, I'm going to put my coins into a multisig. We're going to have 6 keys. I control 2 of the keys, my family and friends control the other 4 keys, and you need 4 signatures to move the money, right? So, even if you kidnap me, I only have 2 keys, and like I can't even move them, like give you the money by myself, right? But on the other hand, if I something terrible happens to me, then at least these other people can come together and recover the funds. And then if I lose 1 or 2 of my devices, then other people can help me recover. If one of my devices gets stolen, then like that 1 key is not enough to steal anything, right? So you could use community trust and trust relationships that you already have to create things that are more secure than both these centralized institutional approaches and this kind of other, like what I've called on Twitter, this sort of mountain man approach of, I'm going to buy a big, tungsten plate and carve my 12 words into a piece of tungsten myself and, leave it in my basement. And I hope I don't forget it if I ever have to move houses. So, I mean, I personally, move residences on average once every 10 days in the past, like 9.5 years. So, it's that like being the mountain man approach is like even more impractical for me than it is for other people, right? So like this is something that for me like isn't even ideological or theoretic. Like it's something that I feel is a use case that's important for me, and I think it's a use case that like really a lot of people in a lot of places value, right? Like avoiding both the pitfall, like getting the conveniences of and the security that you could get from centralization without getting some of the insecurity and some of the systemic risk that you get from centralization, right? So using community trust like directly through things like multisigs. To bring the topic back to things like SVTs, right? The next question is, well, can we use this as some kind of reputation system, right? So if you want to prove to someone in some faraway place that you are basically that you're not a nobody, that you're not a spammer, or even like prove something more specific, prove that you are a unique human, prove that you have some membership in a particular community, you have some specific reason to claim a right to membership in a community. So if you think about like proof of attendance protocol as one of these examples, right, Pope, like this is a protocol that gives you an NFT just for attending a particular event. And if you have a collection of popes, that collection of popes could basically prove that you actually are a very active participant in a particular community, right? And popes are they're not technically soulbound tokens, but I personally consider them soulbound. And the reason why is like, if you really care, like you can transfer a pope, but you can tell whether or not a pope has been transferred, right? Like if you see that, like if you check that I have a pope, right? So like I have a pope representing my participation in the Edelweiss workshop, which is an Ethereum research workshop that happened in Austria in January, right? And if you go on the blockchain and check my pope, you can see that that pope has not been moved yet. But if someone else wants to pretend that they're an Ethereum researcher and they pay me $5,000 for the pope, and I'm feeling greedy that day and I sell it to them for $5,000, like stuff like this actually like is a real world concern, right? Like I actually remember reading I think it was an article on restofworld.org or like one of those sites. I think it was even actually about Africa that talked about how one of the safety problems in ride sharing is basically that like drivers get high reputation accounts and then end up selling them, right? So like the soulbound thing is like basically how do we try to prevent that from happening, right? And here, in the case of popes, well, what happens is you can tell on the blockchain whether or not the pope has been transferred between different accounts. And then now sometimes, transferring between accounts is like a legitimate thing you want to do if you want to like change wallets. But then the idea would be that there's this concept of like community recovery. You could even ask the issuer of the original pope and tell him like, hey, even through an automatic process, like, hey, I switched wallets and, please confirm this for me. And like, you could do a lot of things to try to sort of distinguish between, transfers that are just people transferring for themselves and transfers that are people actually trying to sell the thing, right? And so if you have a rich ecosystem of these soulbound tokens, proof of attendance tokens, proof of humanity tokens, proof of balance of a specific token, prove that you have like at least 5 optimism tokens to prove that you care at least a little bit about the optimism network, right? Like these kinds of, if you have a rich ecosystem of these kinds of things, then that enables a lot of applications. That enables a lot of applications that have to do with definitely kind of like carrying trust across large distances, right? Like if you just pop into a very distant community and you want evidence that, like, for example, you should be allowed to participate in some meetup where the goal of that meetup just happens to be some like very in-depth discussion of some particular topic, and they want people that are actually experienced in that topic, and like you can go and prove that, right? So it's think of the benefits that like being able to prove university degrees might give, for example, but instead of having this kind of very centralized and very limited credential-based system where there's only one kind of institution that gives you this sort of like proof of aptitude, and because of that lots of people get pushed into the university track even if it doesn't necessarily benefit them, you kind of expand it out, and theoretically any kind of activity that you do that represents being part of a community, learning about some particular thing, demonstrating experience in some particular thing, can actually be something that you carry with you and you can create proofs about, right? So that I think there is this kind of very big collection of different pieces that tie together, right? Like one of the most articles that I wrote a few months ago, this was the title, it was on Vitalik.ca, my blog, and the title was What in the Ethereum Application Ecosystem Excites Me? And one of them basically was the Ethereum identity ecosystem, right? And I don't view these things as individual pieces, right? I actually think the biggest benefit of all of these things, so sign in with Ethereum as a replacement to sign in with Twitter, ENS as a way to give yourself a name on Ethereum, soulbound tokens, proof of attendance tokens, proof of humanity as a kind of reputation, and zero knowledge proofs to be able to make proofs about all of these things while protecting your privacy. Like, these are all pieces of the ecosystem that really fit together with each other, right? And once one of them exists and becomes stronger, the others really become more powerful. So it's not something that one single project can accomplish, but it's something where the more smaller projects there are, the more they can plug into each other, and the more we can really create this kind of more open, fair, decentralized replacement for a lot of the existing centralized systems that have these kind of reputation and trust mechanics as their purpose, that actually delivers better results because it uses information that these centralized mechanisms ignore, but at the same time is also a more inclusive. So this is one of the things that I personally find fascinating.
And extremely.
No.
And extremely applicable in Kenya as well. I've met so many young Kenyans who are architects and all of that, and are doing a whole lot of work online based on their on-chain reputation. So I think that's really amazing. There's a lady there. Oh, okay. I think he's choosing.
Hello, my name is Lucy, and I have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are some of the most exciting and innovative use cases for Ethereum that you have witnessed? And also, how do you see the role of Ethereum in the development of decentralized finance, and what opportunities and challenges do you foresee? Thank you.
I think the one really important thing about the idea of exciting applications is that I think it's important to separate exciting and useful. And lots of exciting things are useful, but at the same time, it's important to remember that lots of useful and lots of really important things are from the perspective of someone who's been in the space for a long time, kind of boring, right? So one example of this is that just very simple, bare bones financial applications are something that is very important for a lot of people, and it's even more important for people here than it is for people in wealthy countries, right? Because if you're in wealthy countries, there's lots of financial rails that work well. You have ACH in the United States, you have SEPA, the single euro payments area in Europe. You have very fast connections between some of these wealthier zones. And there are problems, but it's not that bad. But once you start going out of those kind of very well connected regions, I mean, the problems with existing fiat, financial systems start to multiply. It becomes harder to send money internationally. There's a lot of countries that suffer from high levels of inflation, and in those cases, just storing and saving money is something that's like a valuable service for people. And this is something that's like very easy to not think about in the U.S., right? Like in the U.S., people freak out about 8% a year inflation, and meanwhile, 10,000 kilometers south in Argentina, people consider 8% a month inflation normal. And there's this kind of big extremes, these two big extremes, right? And like the closer you are to those kinds of places, the more you appreciate that just even being able to save dollars, or even being able to save in a cryptocurrency which goes up and down instead of a cryptocurrency or instead of a fiat currency which goes down and down, like that's valuable, right? And so I think it's like important to be respectful of just like that kind of simple stuff, and like remember that the simple stuff is useful to people. And I think there are exciting things that that go around the simple stuff and focus on making the simple stuff better. So I talked about social recovery wallets and multi-sig wallets. There's a technology called account abstraction that, like, to me, from a technology perspective, is very exciting. From the point of view as a user, one of the big practical benefits is that it just makes it much easier from a user experience point of view to actually use these kinds of wallets, right? So that's one example of something that's valuable.
Can you share more about account abstraction?
Sure. So the idea behind account abstraction is that today there are two kinds of wallets in Ethereum, or two kinds of accounts in Ethereum. There are what's called EOAs, externally owned accounts, and there are smart contracts. An EOA is an account that's just controlled by a private key, right? So if you have opened MetaMask or Brave or like any other like a kind of self-custodied Ethereum wallet, and you've gone through the experience of spinning up an account, writing down a 12-word passphrase, all of these things, right? You probably have an account that is an EOA. An EOA is an account that is controlled by a private key. A private key is like this big, long 80-digit number that is saved inside of your wallet, and you can regenerate it from your seed phrase. And the account is directly controlled by that private key. If you have the private key, you can spend whatever you want from the account. If someone else hacks the private key, they can spend whatever they want from the account. And if you lose your private key, then no one can spend anything from the account, right? So this is like what I call this kind of fairly fragile Mountain Man approach. Now, the other kind of account is a smart contract wallet. A smart contract wallet is a smart contract in general is an account that's controlled by a piece of code. So instead of there being a private key, where if you sign something with that private key, you can do things, there is a piece of code. And when you send a transaction to that contract, the code executes, and the code can then do things on behalf of the account, right? So instead of the account being controlled by whoever owns the key, the account is controlled by a piece of code. You can think of it as being like a little tiny, extremely simple robot that lives on the blockchain that has this like very fixed, transparent piece of code that could do, usually one or a couple of things, and that's all that it can do. Smart contract wallets are what you're using if you're using social recovery or multisig or any one of these kind of more complicated and safer ways of storing and using your funds. So the Ethereum Foundation wallet, for example, is a multisig wallet. There are 7 keys, and there is a rule that says if you want to send a small amount of money, any one of the 7 keys can do it by itself. But if you want to send a large amount of money, 4 out of 7 have to approve. Right, so this is actually very similar to how banks work, but it's even more secure. You have even more keys. It doesn't depend on a centralized bank, and it actually does deliver like a lot of security and a lot of convenience for the Ethereum Foundation at the same time, which is like really has been amazing for us, right? But this is a smart contract. The rules that say, here are the 7 keys, the number of them that you need to sign big transactions is 4, the number of them you need to sign small transactions is 1, and here is what we mean by big and small. These are all rules that are in code. The problem with smart contract wallets, though, is that they are more difficult to use because the rules of the Ethereum protocol do not let you send transactions from a contract directly. Every transaction has to start from an EOA. Right, so an EOA, externally owned account controlled by a private key. So if you want to use a smart contract wallet, you have to also have an EOA. You have to have Ether in that EOA to pay for gas. You have to send transactions from the EOA. You have to pay an extra 21,000 gas to verify the signature over here. The tools that don't have good support for it. There's like a lot of like extra complexity that you pay, and this is what's preventing a lot of people from using it. So it basically says that you can use smart contract wallets in exactly the same way that you can use external loan accounts. You can send transactions that go directly to them, right? So this is like a very powerful thing that unlocks the ability to use these smart contract wallets in a very cheap and user-friendly way for regular people to store their funds, and makes it possible for us to make that kind of wallet the default for new users. So that's, I think, the dream of a lot of people in the Ethereum ecosystem, right? So that's an example of like something that to me is exciting, to me as a user it's exciting, to me as like a technology geek it's exciting, but it still wraps around the simple piece of like functionality, which is like, hey, I have a wallet and I want to keep it safe. And for most people, my wallet just holds money, stores money, and sends money, right? Sometimes your wallet might hold NFTs, and that's more interesting. Sometimes your wallet might participate in DeFi, that's more interesting. But even if you use the simple stuff, you benefit. In the case of DeFi, like I think I also have this view that simple DeFi is good and complicated DeFi is bad. Like my view is that the really like old DeFi projects, stuff that has existed in the space for more than 4 years, Maker, Uniswap, the stuff that we've kind of grown to know and love if we've been in Ethereum since forever, that stuff has actually been safe. It has not lost people's money, and lots of people really have benefited from it, and it provides a valuable service. Newer stuff that tries to say, oh, I'm going to be clever and I'm going to do clever tricks to try to give people an 11% interest rate. Well, it gives you an 11% interest rate for a little bit. Sometimes it even gives you a 19% interest rate for a little bit. And then comes this 1 week where you get a minus 99.99% interest rate. And this is the problem with complicated stuff. Complicated stuff is fragile, right? And so I'm a big believer that like the simpler DeFi is actually the place where 90% of the value lies, and it's the place where 10% of the risk lies, right? And so what we really want is not more complicated DeFi. What we want is tools to make simple DeFi easy to use for regular people. The other kind of new thing that I think actually excites me, zero-knowledge proofs. Zero-knowledge proofs are incredibly powerful. Privacy is probably one of the biggest weaknesses of the blockchain, aside from scalability and security. And you can think of privacy for transactions, but then the problem gets even worse once you start thinking about privacy for DAOs, for example, right? So in a functional democracy, one of the really core ideas is this concept of a secret ballot, right? When you vote for someone, nobody else knows who you voted for. In fact, you can't even prove to someone else who you voted for, even if you want to. This makes it much more difficult for people to force you to vote for someone. This makes it much more difficult for people to sell their votes, which will lead to the richest people having much more votes than everyone else. And this is like really important for keeping a democracy stable. DAOs, as they exist today, do not have that. All voting is transparent, and as a result, there's a lot of these very nasty dynamics that happen. And voting is plutocratic, and this makes problems even worse. So it just leads to all kinds of these issues, right? And so having zero-knowledge proofs provide privacy for voting in DAOs is also something that just like I think could be really valuable in making DAOs, like actually safer and actually more effective forms of governance. And like DAOs in general are something I'm excited about, right? Like I like the idea of communities and groups being able to manage resources and have governance mechanisms to decide how those resources get allocated and make collective decisions. I think it's a really cool idea, and I'm really glad that blockchains provide the primitives to make it easy to do that. But DAOs are also something that needs a lot more work, needs a lot more experimentation. There's good ways to do DAOs. There's bad ways to do DAOs. And like my hope for the space is that we see a lot more like even concrete and use case driven experiments to see like what actually is a concrete version of this concept that works in some particular context.
Thanks, Vitalik. Got it there.
Hi there. Sorry, Sebastian. You spoke earlier about the existential risks of centralization. Across Africa for the last 10 years, we've only really been building utilitarian blockchain tools because there hasn't been any money coming in, and we've had to solve real problems now, like crossing borders and doing interesting stuff with blockchain. So now across the continent, we have extraordinary blockchain implementations for healthcare, for agri-tech, for supply chain management, for all these sorts of things. But that existential risk still remains that we don't have money coming in to support these things. We have to make a profit out the gate. We have no way of kind of growing to scale. So my question really is this. You've seen the kind of dangers of VCs and other sort of funding mechanisms centralizing some of the mechanisms that we're trying to decentralize in code. How do you see the funding mechanisms changing in order to, and iterating in order to support where non-speculative technologies are being developed rather than the Wenmoon crowd, the people here who are building things that really work?
That's a really good and a really important question. To me, it comes down to better availability of public funding mechanisms. And here, when I say public, like, I don't mean government, right? I mean like mechanisms that really represent the interests of diverse communities and like aren't tied to an imperative to keep making themselves bigger, right? The reason why this is important is because if you look at public funding mechanisms, like especially, I mean, today, but I think it was even worse 5 years ago, like imagine that you're an idealistic developer and you really care about building something that's decentralized. Well, if you build something that's decentralized, you've just kicked out 90% of your possible routes to building a VC-friendly model that can raise a lot of money. And most of the remaining routes involve issuing a token, right? And like, tokens are sometimes okay, and I think like the benefits of really economically empowering communities and putting them in positions where they don't have to make even worse compromises is something that can sometimes be underrated. And so I think tokens can sometimes be good in probably even like more situations than some other people would say they can be. But at the same time, tokens have a lot of downsides, and there are projects where tokens aren't even realistically an option, right? One of my things is that like I want to see a world where fewer people try to build empires and more people try to build tools. But the problem is that people build empires because they've been taught to build empires by the Silicon Valley investment ecosystem because empires are monetizable, right? And there's the whole kind of like cult of becoming the next big Google, and you just know that building an empire is the only way to get like to get your VC master some probability of that juicy $50 billion payout that they're after. And if you build a tool, no matter how successful your tool is, like you could try to pivot to being an empire eventually, and like maybe you could argue that Uniswap kind of did this to some extent because they started off being a very dumb tool, but then they expanded, started adding fees, started adding a DAO. The DAO started doing things, and they're in a position to launch other tools and services and all of this, right? But like it really hampers your ability to do that. And so you want mechanisms that are willing to fund tools, even if they know that a tool is all that tool is ever going to be. So the main public funding mechanism that has existed in the Ethereum community so far probably is the Ethereum Foundation. And the Ethereum Foundation is a centralized mechanism. It is, it has a limited scope. It has a limited amount of funding. It 5 years ago had an even more limited amount of funding. And the ecosystem by itself can't just live off of the Ethereum Foundation, right? And so one of the things that we want to see is we want to see more diverse pools of funding within the ecosystem actually start to exist and grow, right? So Gitcoin grants is one example, right? And Gitcoin grants is based on quadratic funding, which is this kind of decentralized democratic public goods funding mechanism that this researcher Glenn Weil helped to invent. And Gitcoin grants has been stably running for years, and it's been doing some good work. There was Moloch DAO, which Amin Soleimani tried to, created, and it did successfully fund some pretty important stuff. But I think the main challenge with Moloch DAO is that it just, it didn't have a good long-term story for how it would collect funding, and so it ended up being fairly small. Optimism, RPGF. RPGF stands for Retroactive Public Goods Funding. This is this really exciting experiment where basically reward things after those things have already shown an effect. So we basically go around and say like, hey, you invented something and this thing actually turned out to have a big impact. Let's give you a prize. And the goal of this is to try to encourage more people to be willing to participate in these projects at an early stage and even invest in these projects at an early stage, because now, in addition to getting a traditional corporate payout if their project turns out successful, they can also get an RPGF payout. And Optimism RPGF is like a fascinating experiment. I think they're in the process of doing their second round right now, and they have an actually successful engine, right? Because a portion of all the fees go into Optimism RPGF, and this is something that I really value. One of the reasons why I have such a deep respect to the team is because they are willing to actually bake these pro-social things into their protocol in a really deep way, and I personally think that sort of thing is amazing, right? So the more of those we have, the more opportunities that even actually good idealistic developers have to find forms of funding that are congruent with their values without them having to kind of go and sell their soul because they have no other option. I think getting to the point where making public goods is literally more profitable than making private goods is probably not feasible, but we have to remember, not everyone is in this for profit.
My name is Carrie Masi.
Go ahead.
And actually, I'm also a developer. My question is about tokens. Yesterday we had a conversation with Jeff, and he mentioned about the rolls up. But as a person who's transitioning to insurance, the problem is insurance industry is a very conservative industry. And if you're bringing a sort of new tech that requires holding its whole value out of maybe a stable coin or a token, that's very problematic without having to tamper with the conservative nature, because it's conservative for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
So should we wait for the roll-ups project, or should we continue with what we have and just hope for the best, given that one, we do not want to tamper with the conservative nature, and at the same time we are introducing a new aspect. I heard some people are doing microinsurance. I'd be interested to see how they've done it so far. But it's really a problem when you think about it in terms of the conservative nature, while at the same time trying to maintain value, given that a policy could happen. There'd be need for a policy anytime generally. So how do you continue with that? Do we just hope for the best or wait for the rolls up? And if we have to wait for the rolls up, can we at least be allowed to have a platform where we see how it's developing? Because this is the problem that we have as of now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Right. So basically, your problem is that you're building something that needs to exist right now.
Yes.
And okay, I think that's a problem that a lot of people have. I mean, I personally think that Polygon is not a bad solution, because right now it's a fairly centralized sidechain. But the nice thing is you built on it right now, and then over time their current roadmap is to transition to being more like a proper layer 2 and a proper rollup over time. And so you basically get an automatic free upgrade path to actually getting Ethereum-based security and getting more interoperability. There are other scalable Ethereum-based chains that let you have an Ethereum equivalent developer experience, but then let you where you could build there right now and then switch over to rollups when rollups become mature. Gnosis chain is probably another example. There are even developers that build on testnets. There is developers that are building blockchain-based games, and some of those live on testnets. The Dark Forest game, this was a game that was created about 2 years ago that really spawned the genre of trying to make games that include zero-knowledge proofs. That was originally living on, I think, either the Rinkeby or the Robson testnet. Basically you just build on a thing that is, has an Ethereum equivalent interface right now, set it up, make sure that that design works, and then once a proper layer 2 becomes available, either you switch to it or the thing that you're building on, if it's Polygon, hopefully pretty soon that itself switches to being kind of more fully Ethereum secured over time. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but we'll send out a survey And if you've got more questions that weren't covered here, you can tell us more about it, and we'll find a way to send all the answers to those. Thank you all so much for the time here. So we're gonna take a group photo, but it's gonna be really hard to get us all together. So the best idea that we have is we all remain seated, keep our hands down, and then a camera person can take it all the way from up here. So Vitalik, you can go to your seat. Thank you so much. Give Vitalik a round of applause.